Being the youngest in the pack is never fun. First, you can't do anything. And second, you're stuck in the den while the older pups get to explore. But here's the twist. I may be the youngest in the pack, but I'm also the oldest. That's why I'm here, telling you this story. I was told to share it with you, even though I'd rather forget that day ever happened.
I'm a grey dire wolf pup, and once I was just like you, curious, eager to prove myself, and completely unaware of the dangers waiting outside the camp. That day was my first time being allowed beyond the safety of the den. My mentor, let's just call him Dark, was taking me out to learn the ways of the hunt. It was supposed to be a big day, my first time out of camp, and not just anywhere, into the hunting territory. That place is sacred to our pack, the heart of where we find our strength and survival. The scents there are alive, rich and wild, carrying stories of prey, rain-soaked earth, and the power of the forest. It's where the pack teaches pups to hunt, to understand the way of life we all live by. I was eager, maybe too eager, to prove I was ready. My mentor, we'll call him Dark, led me out of camp, and I couldn't stop marvelling at everything around me. The trees smelled fresh and cool, like they'd just been washed clean by the rain. The ground beneath my paws was soft, almost springy, and every breath I took felt like it was filling me with something new and exciting. I felt alive, like I was finally stepping into the world I was meant to belong to. We were heading to the deeper part of the hunting territory, where the big game roams. It's the place where wolves learn the real skills of the hunt, where the pack works together to take down prey that's fast and strong. It's also the edge of our borders, where everything we are meets the unknown. That's where it happened.
As we neared the border, the air changed. It grew heavier, like a storm was about to break. That's when I saw them, wolves from another pack. They were larger than I'd imagined, their eyes sharp, their bodies tense. Our elders stood firm, their growls low and steady, forming a wall between us and them.
I didn't understand what was happening. All I could see was a chance to be brave, to do what the older wolves were doing. I wanted to prove that I could handle it, that I wasn't just some pup who was only meant to be an omega. I was meant to be an alpha, or so I thought.
So I ran forward. Dark called out to me, his voice sharp and urgent, but I didn't hear him, or maybe I just didn't want to. I thought if I could just do what the others were doing, I'd show everyone I was ready. But the wolf I ran up to wasn't like the ones I knew. His growl wasn't a warning, it was a promise of what would happen if I stepped closer.
I couldn't hear anything, and copied the other wolves when I caught sight of my packmates as I barked at the wolf in front of me.
I barked.
The sound cut through the tense silence like a crack of thunder. Every head turned toward me, and I saw the shock in Dark's eyes, the way his body rose. But the worst part was the way the other wolves reacted. The leader of their pack, a massive wolf with scars that told of battles won, locked eyes with me. He didn't hesitate. In an instant, he lunged forward, his jaws closing around me. The world blurred. I felt the pressure of his teeth firm, but not enough to pierce. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My heart hammered in my chest. My ears filled with the panicked growls and whines of my packmates. I thought Dark or the others would save me, that they would do something, but they didn't. They couldn't. The leader of the other pack lifted me like a trophy, holding me in his jaws as he turned back toward my pack. I wasn't a wolf anymore. I was a bargaining chip. My reckless bark had turned me into a tool for negotiation. I couldn't hear the words being exchanged. It was all a haze of fear and pain. But I knew the truth. My mistake had endangered the pack, and there was nothing I could do to fix it. Dark stood still, his body trembling with rage and helplessness. He didn't look at me. He didn't growl. He didn't move. I think that was the moment I realised how bad it was. When I saw my mentor, the wolf who was supposed to protect me, unable to act. Eventually, the leader released me, but not without a cost. I don't remember what was said, what was lost or gained in those tense moments. All I remember is the look in Dark's eyes when he finally turned to me, cold, hard, and full of anger. Not just at me, but at himself, at the situation, at everything. That day changed everything. I don't know how I got back to camp. I don't remember much after being released. All I know is that my actions forced the pack to negotiate, to give something up to keep the peace. And it was my fault.
Wolfgang's sharp voice cut through the chatter in the den like a blade.
And got yourself almost killed.
He growled as his piercing amber eyes landed on me, his tone cold and biting.
You should be grateful. Many hair-brained wolves wouldn't be allowed back into this camp, let alone into this pack.
His gaze didn't waver, drilling into me with a weight that made my fur prickle. I lowered myself instinctively, my belly pressing against the ground as if I could hide from the storm building in his voice. I could feel the younger pups and apprentices shifting uncomfortably around me, their excitement turning into tension as they barked out,
"She keeps getting stuck on the part. Tell us the rest."
Wolfgang turned his attention to the bold pup who had spoken, his expression softening for just a moment before he sighed and sat down. The warmth he showed the others was never meant for me. His voice, steady but laced with authority, filled the den.
She loves to leave out the important part, doesn't she?
His eyes flicked toward me briefly, the faintest curl of his lip betraying his disdain.
So she runs up to the wolf after being told to halt, after being ordered to go back to where she was supposed to be, behind the line. But did she listen? Did she respect her orders?
He paused, letting the question hang in the air before snapping,
No, she downright refused.
The young pup's eyes widened as he leaned forward slightly, his tone growing sharper.
She walked up to the rival leader, got in his face, and thought that was a smart decision. Do you know what happened next?
His gaze turned to me, a flicker of fire in his eyes before he looked back at the young wolves.
She ended up in his teeth, and just like that, she became an offering.
The weight of his words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I tried to shrink further into the ground, my ears flat against my skull. Wolfgang, of course, noticed. He always noticed.
That one act,
He continued, his voice low and deliberate,
forced our leader to make a decision that changed everything. He gave up our hunting grounds, our rights to the big game. And worse, he lost the respect of the other packs. They no longer saw us as the strongest, all because one foolish pup couldn't follow a single order.
His tail flicked sharply as he stood, his dark figure looming over me. The pups watched in silence as he walked toward me, his teeth bared in a snarl.
You're lucky you were a pup,
He spat, his voice a low growl.
because if you weren't, there would be no pack for you.
His glare burned into me for a moment longer before he turned sharply and walked away, his tail swishing behind him in irritation. The young pups, their initial awe of Wolfgang replaced by curiosity and confusion, turned their wide eyes to me.
"Why did you do that?"
One of them barked.
How could you let that happen?
Another added, their high-pitched voices breaking the silence left in Wolfgang's wake. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The weight of their questions, of Wolfgang's words, of my own mistakes, pressed down on me until I felt like I might disappear into the ground. Wolfgang had humiliated me, as he always did, but I understood why. He wanted to ensure no wolf, not even the youngest, ever forgot the price of my failure. And deep down, I couldn't blame him. The young white pup, still defiant, darted out of the den, barking loudly as he pursued Wolfgang. I hesitated, my heart sinking as I watched him go. Before I could act, the wolf in charge gave me a stern look.
Go get him,
She said firmly, leaving no room for argument. I took off after him, my paws thudding against the ground as I followed the sound of his yipping.
How could you continue to hate her?
Cloud barked angrily as he caught up to Wolfgang.
Hasn't she shown she's sorry? Isn't that enough?
Wolfgang stopped in his tracks, turning slowly to face the bold pup. His piercing amber eyes bore into the young wolf, sharp and commanding. With a single sharp bark, Wolfgang made the pup jump, but Cloud didn't back down. He stood his ground, his small chest puffed out, his tail stiff. I reached him, my chest heaving as I tried to calm him.
Let it go,
I said softly, crouching beside him. My voice was pleading, desperate.
Please, Cloud, just come back to the den with me. You don't need to stand up for me. He's right, okay? Just, please.
But Cloud wouldn't listen. He stood firm, his head held high as he growled softly.
I'm going to be called Cloud,
He declared, glancing at Wolfgang.
and I'll be a great hunter. Better than you.
His defiance made my stomach twist. He didn't understand what he was doing, what he was risking. Not just for himself, but for me. Wolfgang's eyes narrowed, his body stiffening as he slowly rose to his full height. His presence was enough to silence the world around him, but Cloud remained stubborn. He glanced at me, confused.
Why won't you stand up to him? Why don't you fight back?
I couldn't answer. My ears flattened as I begged him again, my voice trembling.
Please just come back to the den. Don't do this. I don't want you to get in trouble because of me.
Wolfgang's sharp bark echoed through the clearing, silencing both of us. His howl followed, a call to the entire pack. My heart sank as I watched him summon everyone, knowing this wouldn't end well. For either of us. The pack gathered quickly, their eyes curious and expectant as they formed a circle. Cloud looked up at Wolfgang, his bravado faltering slightly.
What's going on?
He asked, his voice quieter now. Wolfgang's lips curled into a subtle smirk, one that made my fur prickle.
Well, young pup,
He said, loud enough for all to hear.
you're of age now, aren't you? Perhaps it's time we assign you a mentor.
Cloud's confusion gave way to excitement. His tail wagged as he looked around the gathered wolves, his eyes shining. My stomach churned. I stepped forward, lowering my head as I pleaded with Wolfgang.
Please.
I whispered, my voice barely audible.
He doesn't know. Please don't do this.
Wolfgang's smirk widened, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction.
What's wrong?
He asked mockingly, his voice low enough that only I could hear.
Afraid of losing even more of your place?
He turned back to the pack, his voice booming.
What about shade?
He asked, his gaze sweeping over the wolves. The murmurs of the pack rippled through the air as their eyes turned to shade. A wolf with a coat of brown and gray, his imposing figure rivaling Wolfgang's. I backed away, my legs trembling as I lowered my head further. Not in agreement, but in defeat. I knew what this meant. I knew what it would do to me. Cloud, still excited, looked up at Wolfgang, his confusion melting into anticipation.
What's happening?
He asked eagerly. Wolfgang stepped forward, his voice commanding as he addressed the pack.
From this day forward,
He declared.
you will be known as Cloud.
He paused, letting the weight of the announcement sink in before adding,
And your mentor will be Shade.
The pack howled their approval, their voices echoing through the clearing. Cloud's tail wagged wildly as he stood tall, his excitement washing away any memory of why he had confronted Wolfgang in the first place. His declaration of standing up for me, his defiance, all of it vanished as he basked in the glory of his naming ceremony.
I stood there frozen, the humiliation cutting deeper than anything Wolfgang could have said. A pup, was now ranked above me. Not just any pup, but one who had defied the norms by choosing his own name, something that never happened.
And I was left to stand in the shadow of it, knowing Wolfgang had orchestrated every piece of this moment to make sure I suffered. Cloud, now full of pride, didn't even look back at me as the pack congratulated him. He had forgotten why he had barked at Wolfgang in the first place. Forgotten me. But I couldn't forget. I couldn't escape the weight of what this moment meant. And Wolfgang, he had made sure I never would. Wolfgang stood to the side, watching the scene unfold with a look of genuine satisfaction, the kind that made my fur bristle. His sharp amber eyes glinted as they flicked from the now-named Cloud to me, and I could feel the weight of his gaze even as I tried to avoid looking at him. Cloud, oblivious to the tension, bounded over to me, his tail wagging furiously.
I got my name and a mentor. Can you believe it?
His voice was full of excitement, his small frame practically vibrating with energy. I dropped to the ground instinctively, my head lowered, my body pressed flat against the dirt in a display of respect to his new, higher rank. The gesture stopped him short, his tail faltering as he looked at me in confusion.
Hey,
He said hesitantly, tilting his head.
you don't need to bow to me. We're the same.
I lifted myself slowly, my ears flattening as I looked into his bright, confused eyes.
No, young pup.
I said softly, my voice heavy with the weight of the truth.
We're no longer the same.
I turned to leave, but his voice stopped me.
Wait, I don't understand.
He said, his tone tinged with frustration and desperation. I paused, counting the seconds in my head as I took a deep breath. For exactly 5 seconds, I held still, then turned my head slightly to speak.
You earned your name good.
My voice was steady, but the words felt like stones in my mouth. I bowed my head once more, then walked away, my steps deliberate and slow. Behind me, I could hear Cloud's soft whimper of confusion, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. The humiliation of bowing to a pup, of bowing to him, was already too much to bear. As I moved toward the edge of the camp, I heard the deliberate sound of paws approaching. Wolfgang. His presence was impossible to ignore, even when he wasn't speaking. He moved closer, his growl low and rumbling.
Come with me.
He commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. I stopped, lowering my head in submission as I turned to follow him. His growl lingered in the air, and though I couldn't see his face, I could feel the satisfaction radiating from him. He'd gotten what he wanted, a public reminder of my place, a reinforcement of my disgrace. I trailed behind him, my paws dragging slightly as I prepared myself for whatever came next. Wolfgang was always calculated, always deliberate. Whatever he had planned, I knew it wouldn't be good. But I followed him anyway. I had no choice. Wolfgang's voice lashed out like a whip, sharp and cutting.
So you can follow orders.
He sneered, his tone dripping with annoyance as he led me to the secluded area of camp. The space was suffocatingly empty, the kind of place wolves avoided unless summoned. I could feel the weight of his irritation radiating off him as he turned sharply to face me.
So you've got pups standing up for you,
He barked, his tail lashing behind him. His amber eyes narrowed with fierce intensity, and I kept my gaze fixed on the ground. Quietly, I managed to murmur,
I never asked for them to stand for me.
His growl rumbled through the air, cutting me off immediately.
I didn't tell you to speak.
He snapped, his voice sharp enough to make me flinch.
How does it feel, to be utterly humiliated? Lower than a pup now, a brave pup at that, standing up to me for a disgrace like you.
His words were venomous, each one sinking into me with deliberate precision. My paws shifted uneasily, but I stayed silent, knowing anything I said would only make it worse. He tilted his head slightly, a calculated pause in his tirade, and then, with a sharp huff, he continued.
Humph. Well, I guess you're worth a second chance.
His tone shifted. Not softer, but more measured. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something colder, more controlled, as though he had already decided this outcome long before now. I glanced up reflexively, my surprise breaking through my shame.
What?
I blurted, unable to stop myself. His eyes flashed, and he snapped his teeth with a quick, sharp motion that made my stomach twist. Did I tell you to speak? He growled, his tone low and threatening. My head immediately dropped again, my ears flattening in submission. Wolfgang stepped closer, his shadow falling over me as he loomed.
You screw up any time during training.
He began, his voice slow and deliberate.
Step out of line or have the gall to argue with your mentor, and I'll make sure your role in this pack is as low as it gets.
His words were smooth, deliberate, almost too calm.
You'll not only lose your chance at a name, you'll lose even your dignity. You'll be known as Pup forever.
He let the words hang in the air, their weight suffocating, as if daring me to make the slightest mistake right then and there. His gaze locked on mine, cold and calculating, as though he could already see the cracks forming under the pressure he was applying.
So,
He growled, his voice dropping lower, more dangerous.
if I were you, I'd watch every single step.
The silence that followed was deafening. I kept my head bowed, my paws trembling slightly, as I waited for his permission to leave. His stare lingered, unrelenting, until finally he spoke again, his voice sharp and dismissive.
I'll see you tomorrow. Now leave.
I bowed quickly and turned, running back toward the den as fast as I could without outright sprinting. My heart raced, Wolfgang's words still echoing in my ears as I pushed into the den, my paws dragging with exhaustion. The wolf in charge stood waiting for me, her gaze piercing and unyielding. I hesitated, trying to find the words. But she cut me off, her tone cold and impassive.
You tried. Guess this makes you even lower now,
Her words hit like a stone to my chest, and I dropped my gaze, unable to meet her eyes. Without another word, I trudged to my usual spot and curled up on the ground, my body heavy with shame. This time, the pups didn't come to me. They didn't press close like before, their small bodies offering comfort and warmth. Instead, they huddled together, their backs turned to me as they cuddled each other. The distance between us felt like a chasm, unbridgeable. As I lay there, Wolfgang's calculated, deliberate words replayed in my mind. This wasn't just anger. This was his plan, his way of ensuring I never forgot my place, of keeping me exactly where he wanted me, lower than a pup. And I couldn't escape the cold reality that for now it was exactly what I was. As I slept, the dreams came.
I was running through the trees, their shadows pressing in like a suffocating weight. The branches above were so thick and twisted that the sky was completely obscured, leaving me in a world of impenetrable darkness. My paws pounded the ground, but I couldn't hear the thud of each step. There was no sound, no smell, just a void. I ran blindly, branches clawing at my face and stones tripping me up. The ground beneath my paws felt uneven and treacherous, but I couldn't stop. I didn't know why I was running, only that I had to keep moving. The darkness swallowed me whole, its silence deafening.
I jolted awake, my heart pounding. The den was eerily silent, but the darkness of the night still lingered around me. I blinked a few times, trying to shake the heaviness of the dream. My vision adjusted slowly, and I glanced toward where the pups usually lay, searching for the familiar shapes of their small bodies huddled together. But they weren't there.
Hope y'all enjoyed that. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now. Also, there's more to come in the next episode. Stay tuned.